Great, and we'll turn it over to you, Brendan.
Yeah. And am I driving now, or are my slides showing, or not yet?
Not yet. So you can click share and you'll take over.
I will. All right. So I have to go back to share, and I'm gonna window. Let me see if I can get this right. All right. What are you seeing? How's that?
Just about sharing. There we go. We see
There we
it.
go. How about that? How about that? So so the title of this topic is how to fix sales calls in 30 minutes, and then convert to more leads. And what I first of all, I appreciate the chance to do this again. I did this a while ago, and I love these sorts of conversations. I'm going to try and keep it very simple. Please ask questions, and I'll try to keep it very practical and actionable. And it was very helpful. And so I'm going to leave some time at the end as well to talk about AI a little bit that came up, and also other questions. So I'll kind of zip through this, and then we can kind of use the remaining time to kind of talk through any open, issues you're being challenged with, or sales problems, or sales opportunities that you're running into. Real quick about me, a couple things. One is I've been in enterprise and B2B sales for a long time, written a book on B2B sales, and I've been an entrepreneur in residence and that sort of thing. And running Accelerator in the past, and we'll be running another one this coming January. My specialty is health tech right now. I do a lot with the health tech space. And I'm a fellow startup founder, expertscape.com, which identifies and objectively ranks medical experts by specific topic. And chances are my hope is you don't ever have to use it, because if you're using it, you've got a serious health condition typically. One thing I will also say about this is I'm not a big fan of slides. As a salesperson, I try and stay away from them. I just think that they kind of constrain you, number one. And also the about me slide, generally speaking, I tell people keep it really short, and because nobody cares about you, they care about themselves. So I've spent a lot of time working with founders, health tech execs, and their sales teams a lot. And I do this thing called sales call tune-ups and sales rep accelerator programs, where I work with a salesperson, either individual on one call or over a period of time, to elevate their sales game. And one of the things I find I spend myself doing a lot of, spending a lot of time talking about mindset and putting people in the right frame of mind to sell. And so I'm going to spend, before I share a few quick sales tips I think that are helpful, I want to spend a couple minutes just on mindset, because I think it's important. And that is, the first thing is you have to get yourself to understand that you're the expert, that you're an expert. And when I say that, I mean I want you to get out of the mindset of selling. So don't think of yourself as selling or being a salesperson. Think of yourself as a consultant, as a trusted advisor to whomever you're talking to. And that is that you're an expert, or you're an expert in training. And when I say expert in training, is you're collecting experiences and knowledge as you go about your these conversations that you're collecting with individuals. And that puts you in a position to be knowledgeable of things. If you've talked to 10 or 15 or 20 different customers, you're going to be in a unique position in terms of being able to understand things, recognize certain patterns, see common problems, see common opportunities that they're not able to see, because they're ensconced in their own company, in their own business, and they don't get to see to the same degree and hear problems from multiple different companies or businesses that are in the same general area. So that really enables you to consider yourself as someone who can advise people and provide guidance. And so what that allows you to do is diagnose a problem, and rather than pitch them. And I would stress that you want to diagnose and not try to sell so much as see if there's a fit, see if there's a way that you can help them solve a problem. And if you can't, that's just as good as if you can. You want to focus on those opportunities where you think you can really deliver a value and make it easy to help deliver a solution that benefits them and thus yourself and gets you the kind of customer that you want to have. The second thing from a mindset, and we'll keep it very quick, is be curious. And this is not an easy thing to inculcate in somebody, but if you can be curious about in the situation that you're in, it does a number of things for you. And I think of sales as an opportunity to learn, and you're gathering new information, you're getting new ideas, you're having interesting conversations, and you're seeing where there are opportunities for improvement. And so one of the things I would say about any sales call that you get into is spend the first few minutes before the call getting yourself in the mindset of, I know stuff about this. I'm knowledgeable in this space. I've got expertise and experience, and I can provide ideas and angles and new perspectives, and those sorts of things empower you. And I think they put you in the right frame of mind to have a better conversation with your customer. And then, of course, at the same time, you don't have to be the smartest person in the room. If you're curious and interested and engaged, that telegraphs a level of commitment and investment, and it tends to be disarming with your prospective customer. So, and it also puts you in a position to learn more, and then ideally, the more you learn, the more expertise you have, the more potential you have for being able to deliver a solution that's attractive to your customer. One of the things that came up in the breakout that is kind of interesting is that sometimes people will, sometimes you'll find out that the customer doesn't see that they have a problem. And if you've got enough background, enough experience, enough of these face-to-face conversations and have gathered a lot of experience, you're probably going to be in a unique position to point out areas, that blind spots, so to speak, that they don't know they have. Areas where they may be spending too much money. They may be doing things in a more antiquated fashion. There may be better ways to do them that are more efficient or they're more profitable. There may be revenue opportunities that they don't see that you may be able to point out to them. Those sorts of things, they come with that kind of experience and expertise that you gather with sales. So with that in mind, there are any number of things that I could talk about in terms of simple things that you can do, but these are some of the ones that I find myself I'm constantly reminding salespeople and founders about certain practices. And I have the book that I wrote. There's a whole bunch of these. It's focused particularly on B2B, but here are 6 that I think that are universally useful. So the first one is when you start out a call, one of the questions I always ask at the front end of the call is, what would you like to accomplish on this call? Or what would make this call effective for you, or something to that effect? And what you're doing very early on with this simple question, this simple technique is you're inviting the person to jump in right away and explain what their expectations are, explain what they're up against. And what this allows you to do is get the customer, your prospective customer, talking, number one, and explaining things in some way, a meaningful way that you can then use later on to direct your conversation more effectively, right? So you can make the conversation much more about the things that matter to them. The follow-on to this question is, oh, really? That's interesting. Tell me more. Could you tell me more about that? Or allowing you to dive into some aspect of whatever it is they want to accomplish. And by doing so, this also gives you the time to relax a little bit and to listen and to take notes and focus on the things that are complementary to whatever it is that you're there to talk about. and it allows you to, it gives you basically instruction on what things that matter and what things that are secondary or tertiary. So you don't go, this way you're not forced into going down some rote, predictable demo, but rather you're making it much more of an interactive conversation. The second one is, and this is related to the first, the one before, and that is, don't discuss solutions until you've talked about the problems. And I invariably see salespeople introduce themselves, and then start talking about their solution. And the problem with this is, we may need to mute somebody, but the problem with this is, if you start talking about your solution before you understand the problem, you're going to spend a lot of time talking about things that don't matter to them. And if you touch on enough things that don't matter to them, you will lose the customer. This also applies to any kind of outbound sales messaging that you might have. If you're trying to send emails out to people, cold emails, or you're trying to cold call people, or just get a conversation going. If you start with your own solution first, you're ignoring whatever the specific issues that they may be up against, or you're making them secondary to your motivation to sell your thing. And so it's, in the same way, we want to really focus on what is it that you're trying to accomplish on their behalf. And that ultimately has to bring you back to the problem itself. The third one is, know the objections. And when I say this, what I mean is, you need to spend a few minutes before each call, and just in general, asking yourself, why wouldn't someone buy from you? What are the things that would cause them to not not to choose you as a solution partner? And, is it budget? Is it timing? Is it the complexity of what you do and the implementation? What are those things? And then I think you probably know where I'm going with this. The next thing is to figure out how might you respond to that? And if you can do those two things together, that's going to prepare you much more for the conversations you have with customers. But beyond that, I think what you want to do is, you want to, where you can, talk about the objections right up front. Here's why. Here's what we do. Ultimately, when you get into the conversation at some point, here's what we do. We can solve this problem we talked about, blah, 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 whatever. And then what you want to say at some point is that typically one of the reasons why people don't use us is this. And then bring it out in the open, get it out there and explain it. And then or ask it as a question. Hey, is this going to be a problem? Here's one of the things we do. We require that we have access to your API. And that's how we pass the data back and forth. And some people are disinclined to make that available to us. I'm making this up, but that would be as an example. Is that going to be a problem? And if you can surface the objections, if you know what the objections are, if you had a chance to think about them and craft, potential responses, you're going to be ahead of the game when it comes to the sales. And they're not going to be surprises anymore, because you know them. And in fact, if you bring them up, then it gives them the opportunity to say, oh yeah, that's a real problem. Or conversely, oh, that's not an issue. That's no big deal. And if it's a real problem, you can explore that. Oh, really? Tell me more. If it's not a problem, you go, oh, great. And then you can move on. That's an important thing to think about. And then one other point about objections is, I would not view them as anything other than information. And that is to say, you really want them out there. You want to know what they are. You want to know, and because at some level, they tell you if the customer is really interested, if the customer is motivated, if the customer is the person that ultimately can make the decision. If they make up, there are certain objections or resistance that you'll pick up from a given customer, that tells you a lot. And so you kind of want to get them out there. You don't want to be afraid of them. The next one that is one that's always worked for me, and this is especially true whenever you're selling to larger organizations, and that is be prepared to engage with everyone. And that is not just the CEO or not just the person that's the decision maker, but try to learn from multiple people within the organization. Engage with people, everyone if you've got multiple people on the call, then you certainly want to be able to try and make sure that everyone gets heard. It makes you it makes you look good, for one. It makes you collaborative. One of the things I find, if it's a big call or it's an important presentation or important meeting with multiple people, what I'll try to do is I'll try to talk to them individually beforehand. If I've got a meeting with someone, a week and a half from now, where I'm doing a formal presentation or like a sales call, and there's multiple people in that call, I will try to reach out to them beforehand, individually, and see what do you need to hear about? What's important to you? What sorts of things? I want 10 minutes. Can I, any chance, excuse me, I get 10 minutes with you? I want to get your perspective on this stuff and make sure we're covering everything that we need to cover and things that are important. And if you can do that with individuals, you'll find that, number one, if they're talking to you one-on-one, they're much more inclined to tell you things that they won't say in a group with multiple people. You'll also have a chance to follow up and ask follow-up questions much more easily. You can gather more information that allows you to look smarter when you do finally have that big demo or the big presentation. And the other thing is when you get in that room with people, they already know you. You've established some level of connection. So one of the things I often say with customers is everything matters. Everybody matters. And I can learn very important things from people low in the organization that are living with the day-to-day tedium or obstacles of a bad solution. And they're the ones that can arm me with specifics. And then when I'm talking to a senior level person, I can oftentimes share with them stuff that's happening at the ground level that they don't even know about because no one wants to tell them. No one wants to tell them the bad news. And so as a salesperson, I'm in a position to kind of give them insight about their organization they may not hear from anybody else. Fifth, know what you need to know. And when I say that, what I mean is when you get into a sales call, before that sales call, you need to know a number of things if you're going to figure out if this is a real call, if it's qualified, if it's a qualified opportunity, how to prioritize it, who's involved, and so forth. So you want to know a number of things. There are a lot of questions that you're going to want to collect. And if you email me afterwards, I have a kind of worksheet that I share with some of my customers that they use as a kind of a template to kind of craft the questions they need to have. And the generic questions are, how do you guys do things today? How do you do it now? And why do you do it that way? And then of course, tell me more. Get into some more specifics. When do you need to solve this? Right? And that's basically a way of asking the question: how much pain is this? How difficult is it? How expensive is what you're doing it today? So what's the level of motivation? Are they putting this out to RFP? Is this something they're just planning for next year? Do they need it yesterday? And oftentimes customers will tell you exactly that. You also want to know who's involved, right? Who gets to make this decision? Who's involved in the decision-making process? What's the decision-making process? What sorts of things do you need to have happen in order to make this happen? They may not even know, right? If they don't buy things often enough. I had this come up the other day. Someone they've never had to buy a particular piece of software that was involved, and so they don't know. You may be talking to people that don't know what needs to happen. In that case, you're in a situation where you can actually tell them, oh, here's what we typically need to do. We need to see this person. We need someone, your CIO, because of this. We need to talk to someone in operations, and here's why. And then they can sit there and then, that makes sense. And then you can start to coordinate these other meetings and the involvement of other people. And then my last one. This is not a lesson I've been demonstrating much now, but this is a simple one, but it's very important. It's perhaps the most useful one of the most useful little techniques I've learned in my sales career, and that is to pause. Ask when you ask a question, and then they answer it. Don't respond right away. Wait 2 seconds, 3 seconds, because what happens is it gives people more time to continue and add more to whatever it was, whatever the answer was that they had shared with you, right? And when that happens, a couple things immediately take place. One is you're likely to hear a lot more than you thought you would, and oftentimes the things you hear next are more important than the things they started with, because they've had a chance to get their chat going. They've had a chance to think about things as their brain is moving along as they're talking, and and they can start to think of other things they need to tell you. Secondly, when you give them space to talk, it relaxes you and it relaxes them. And when they're relaxed, they're much more inclined to have a good time. They're much more inclined to enjoy things. They're much more inclined to feel like they've been heard and respected, and that what they said matters. And the byproduct of that, which is critically important, is they they like and trust you more, because you're allowing them the space to express themselves and their issues and what's important to them. And those are just critically important. I find those to be just this is critically important. And you'll find this journalists are really good at this sort of thing. And then they'll ask a question and they won't answer. They won't After the answer, they will pause. They won't immediately come up with the next question, but wait a second, because there's more that follows. One thing related to this that's kind of useful to know is if you're in a room with another person from your team and you pause, there's this incredible incentive for the other person to chime in. And so you have to coordinate with who, if you're selling in conjunction with someone else on your team, you may have to make sure that they understand, hey, I'm not rushing into the next question for a reason, which means that doesn't give you the right to just start talking just because I stopped. Because what you're really trying to do is you're trying to get the other people on the other side of the table to talk. So, with that in mind, there's the last point I would make is, I feel compelled to remind people of this all the time. It should be fun. Selling should be, you should find it enjoyable. If you're doing it right, it will be fun. And when it starts to become fun, when it becomes enjoyable, you'll find that your customers find it enjoyable too. They'll start to relax. They'll start to enjoy the conversation. And when they do that, good things happen all the way around. And so one of the things I often tell people, I really stress, if you're not having fun, you're not doing it right. You got to figure out a way to do it right. And that's not easy to learn necessarily, because there's tremendous pressure. You want to sell and so forth. But ultimately, if you can kind of let go of some of that and kind of take a more of a Zen approach to things, you'll find that the result is oftentimes much greater and much more rewarding, and it results in a lot more success. So, with that in mind, that's what I wanted to kind of talk about. I mean, I could talk for hours and hours, as I'm sure you could pick up on. Uh,
Thanks.
but
Thanks, Brendan. We got a couple of questions that came in while you were presenting.
Sure.
So, and you kind of touched on this at the end, but and I don't have the name, but it says iPhone. Curious how you keep up your energy if you've got 5 or 6 calls in a row. So, any advice on how you schedule, how you block time, and how you keep energy up throughout the day? Even if you enjoy the work, it still takes energy.
Yeah, yeah. Well, one thing is, you can, if you got a few minutes in between, the best thing you can do is get up and get moving about for a few minutes, right? And just because there's all sorts of science behind the fact that if you can get up and move, and even a little bit, it elevates your not just your blood flow and your energy level, but also your mentality and your general demeanor. It generally improves. People that can get out and take a walk even for 10 minutes end up, it's a great way to like reduce your depression and increase your mood and that sort of thing. So that's one thing I would do. The other thing is everyone's going to make mistakes in the course of a sales calls at various times. And so one of the things I would strongly suggest people do to kind of get themselves enervated and excited is to think about what went right in the last call. What did you like about it? What worked? And not to dwell on the things that went wrong or the things that were incomplete or whatever, but to kind of focus on that. I have my iced coffee in the afternoon. The other thing I would say is if there's any, I don't know if you have this control, but if you're able to coordinate your calls when you've got the energy that you need, I find that like 2 o'clock, 2:30 to 3:30 is my kind of low part of the day where I just don't have the same level of energy. And so I try not to do anything that requires me to be at 100% during that window of time. And I don't know, everyone has their own biological clock and their rhythm, but I find that I do my best stuff like between, early in the morning until like 1ish, and then I have a pick up again around 3:30 or 4, and that's when I'm at my best.
Okay. Another question from Kyle. Let's see. So I'll just give the preamble there. Many times it's hard to get the client to talk about their problems when they already implemented a solution, but that didn't work as well as they had hoped, but they don't want to admit that. So how do you help facilitate that conversation so they'll open up?
That's a great question. And so the first thing I would say is if you're going to have that conversation, it's best to have that one-on-one because people are much less inclined to be open with the more folks are in the room. So if you can have that question one-on-one, that's the first thing I would do. The second thing I would do is I'd say I might start out by saying, you might start by saying something like, "This is one of the things I run into is I've got customers that have been in the same spot, or I just had a customer we replaced. They went through a situation where they made this decision. They had a vendor. It's not working out. There was no way for them to know because the vendor with A, B, C, whatever the reason. And so the degree to which you can kind of make them recognize that the problem is not that the situation they find themselves in is not that unique. It's not that unusual. The other thing is anyone that can identify that they made it, and this to some degree this depends on the culture of the company, but a lot of companies, if you cause a problem and then you can fix the problem, that's that's the kind of employee you really want to have. Someone that can figure out, oh, hey, we got this problem and we made this decision. It didn't go well. We got to fix it. And it's critically important that we do. And you do it. That oftentimes it can actually burnish or improve your reputation inside the company. Uh, I guess that's what I would say there. I don't know if that fully answered
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, that's good. Um, Other questions? You can come off mute or just post it in the chat.
One, if there isn't one of the questions that came up in the breakout was AI, and this is just an enormous topic right now, and there are so many things that are not clear as to what. And by the way, if you want, I have a whole rant on this later on. I mean, if you want to call me later and talk about it, because I actually think there's fascinating thing about where this market's going. But the thing about AI that I would say is it's in the short term, it's going to be a very useful tool for salespeople, and it behooves you to learn about it and use it, to effect. One of the things I find is that's very useful on the front end is before I go in to talk to a customer, I'll oftentimes drop their email, their website link into the chat, into the prompt, and then say, I want to learn more about this company. How do they do business? How do they make money? And what's their business model? And how do they? What sorts of problems do people in this industry typically have? And then explain this to me like I'm, in 10th grade. and then see what you get back. And one of the things I find is really important in a prep is the degree to which you can understand someone's how your customer makes money, how your customer does business, what sorts of problems your customer has on the front end before you get on the call, it allows you to ask better questions, allows you to validate some of your assumptions better, and the like. So I would use AI in that regard at the front end of a call. It's like just to see what matters to them. So you're speaking in terms in their terms. What sort of jargon do they use that you should be aware of? What sorts of metrics do they employ to measure the how well their business is doing? You know, from a and you know, you may know all this because you're buried in that industry, but if you're not, that's a useful tool for AI. Um, and then of course, just the standard helping you to do a better job of organizing your thoughts and so forth. One of the things I do is I record a lot of sales calls, and when I do, I drop them into the chat, and I use the transcript to just summarize the call, and then I drop that into my CRM, and so I have that as a record, and I know what the kind of the follow up items are out of that call from it. I find that to be quite useful.
Great use there. Yeah, John wrote in the chat what I was thinking when you said have GPT, tell it to me like I'm a 10th grader. He said usually fifth grader is what he's gonna. Joe asked, and we'll make this the last question. Is there a
Sure.
certain type of objection that you actually get excited about once it presents itself?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, I like that. Well, first of all, I like learning new stuff. So I like the surprise. The surprise is the fun part of the job at one level. I mean, like, to see if you can get through it. So the challenge of it. So I like certain objections. I like any kind of time there's a new surprise. Pricing objections are always fascinating to me because if you've done the right work on the front end, the price should not be an issue. And so I find that if someone ends up, you're too expensive, eh, then I want to know compared to what? Compared to doing things the way you're doing them today, compared to some other competitor, compared to what's in your head in terms of what you're willing to spend, that sort of thing. So I sort of like the price objection as one uh, that sort of intrigues me because I think you can oftentimes go up against price if you're identifying the right level of pain and return on investment and so forth. Price should not be a big issue. Uh, so I hope that helps.
That's great. Thank
So
you, Brendan, for coming in and sharing your sage advice here.
can I just close out? So first of all, I have some material. I mean, like some things. If you want to reach out to me and email me, I've got I've got a little worksheet that's related to this, and I've got a kind of a sales planning worksheet that kind of articulates a whole bunch of questions. If you want something to kind of use, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. And then one thing I do is I have this sales call tune up where if you send me a video of a recording of one of your sales calls, and this is one of the things I do for people is I'll review the sales call and then go over it with you. And then, if that's something that's of interest to you, that's one thing that I do. So I hope this helps. And, thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thanks, Brendan. Thanks, everyone, for coming out. We'll see you next week.
All right. Bye bye.